Eleanor Grayson lived a life that many in her small farming town couldn't quite understand. She wasn't always this way silent, withdrawn, almost like a ghost haunting her own home. Once upon a time, she had been the heart of the community. Her laughter used to echo through the village during festivals, and her warm smile could light up even the gloomiest of days. People would stop by her house just to chat, not because they needed anything, but because being around Eleanor made them feel good. But all of that changed when her husband, Thomas, passed away. It happened suddenly. A fever swept through the region, and though most recovered, Thomas didn't. One day he was there, strong and full of life, cracking jokes over breakfast. Next, he was gone. The loss hit Eleanor harder than anyone expected. It wasn't just sadness. It was as if part of her soul had vanished along with him. She stopped going to town gatherings. She stopped answering knocks at her door. Over time, people stopped visiting altogether. They figured she wanted space. Or maybe she didn't want to see their pitying faces anymore. Her days became predictable, almost ritualistic. Every morning, she'd wake up before sunrise, brew herself a cup of tea, and sit on the porch watching the sun peek over the hills. Then she'd tend to her garden, pulling weeds and watering plants that seemed to grow more out of habit than care. Chickens clucked lazily around the yard, and an old cow mooed softly in the distance. These animals were her only company now. Even the dog they'd once shared, a scruffy mutt named Rusty, had passed away years ago. The townsfolk talked about her sometimes, usually in hushed tones. Some said grief had broken her completely, while others believed there was something else weighing on her mind. Rumors swirled. Maybe she blamed herself for Thomas's death, or perhaps she knew secrets no one else did. No one really knew what went on inside that little house surrounded by wildflowers and overgrown grass. All they knew was that Eleanor Grayson had become a mystery, a woman frozen in time, living in silence year after year. But here's the thing about mysteries. Sometimes they hold answers we least expect. And deep down, Eleanor wasn't entirely silent. Inside her head, memories played like old films, flickering images of happier times. She remembered Thomas leaning against the kitchen counter, humming tunes as he chopped vegetables. She remembered dancing under the stars at harvest festivals, his arms wrapped tightly around her waist. Most of all, she remembered the last conversation they ever had, the one where he spoke in riddles, his voice weak but urgent. "There's a promise," he'd whispered, gripping her hand tightly. A debt owed gold beyond measure. At the time, she thought it was the fever talking. How could there be gold? They weren't rich. They barely scraped by on what the farm produced. Still, those words stuck with her long after he was gone. Maybe it was foolish, but somewhere in the back of her mind, she held on to the idea that someday, somehow, those cryptic phrases would make sense. And so, Eleanor waited, not eagerly, not impatiently, but quietly, patiently. She kept tending to her garden, feeding her chickens, and sitting on her porch as the seasons changed. Spring turned to summer, summer to fall, and fall to winter, each year blending into the next. Life moved forward for everyone else, but for Eleanor it stood still, until one crisp autumn morning, when the sound of hooves shattered the quiet rhythm of her world. It started as a distant rumble, faint but growing louder. Eleanor was sitting on her porch, knitting a scarf she'd probably never finish, when she noticed movement on the horizon. A cloud of dust rose above the dirt road leading to her house. Squinting against the sunlight, she saw shapes emerging, horses, 10 of them, galloping steadily toward her. Each horse carried a rider cloaked in dark fabric, their faces hidden beneath hoods. For a moment, Eleanor felt a pang of fear. Who were these strangers? What did they want? The riders slowed as they approached her gate, and the tallest figure among them dismounted gracefully, He pushed back his hood, revealing sharp blue eyes and a face weathered by time. His presence commanded attention, yet there was kindness in his expression. "Mrs. Grayson?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Eleanor nodded, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her heart raced, though she tried to stay composed. This man and the 9 others behind him looked like they belonged in another era, not here in her quiet corner of the world. "I'm Gabriel," the man continued, stepping closer. "We've come a long way to find you. Your husband, Thomas. He left something unfinished, something important." Eleanor froze, her breath caught in her throat. After all these years of waiting, of wondering, was this finally the moment she'd been hoping for? Or was it something else entirely? Whatever it was, one thing was certain. Her life was about to change forever. Gabriel's words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and impossible to ignore. Eleanor stared at him, her mind racing. Her husband had left something unfinished? What could it possibly be? She wanted to ask questions, to demand answers. But her voice felt trapped somewhere deep inside her chest. Instead, she simply nodded again, motioning for him to continue. Gabriel seemed to understand her hesitation. He didn't push her or rush his explanation. Instead, he took a step back and gestured toward the riders still mounted on their horses. "We're here to honor a promise," he said slowly, as if choosing each word carefully. "A promise made to your husband long ago. A debt that is owed not just to him, but to you." Eleanor's grip tightened on her shawl. Debt? Promise? None of this made sense. Thomas had been a farmer, a simple man who worked hard and lived modestly. How could he have been involved in anything so mysterious? And yet, there was something about the way Gabriel spoke, his tone steady, his eyes unwavering, that made her believe him. It was as if he carried the weight of truth with him, a truth too big to dismiss. "Come inside," she finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. The words surprised even herself. After years of avoiding visitors, of shutting people out, she was inviting strangers into her home. But something told her this wasn't an ordinary visit. Something told her she needed to hear what Gabriel had to say. The group followed her into the house, their boots creaking softly against the wooden floorboards. The interior was plain but cozy, with faded curtains hanging over the windows and mismatched furniture scattered around the room. Dust motes floated lazily in the sunlight streaming through the cracks in the shutters. It was clear no one had set foot in this space except Eleanor for a very long time. Gabriel settled into a chair by the fireplace while the others remained standing, their cloaked figures casting long shadows across the walls. Eleanor sat opposite him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched thin, almost unbearable, until Gabriel finally broke it. "Your husband was a remarkable man," he began, leaning forward. "Slightly. He did things most people wouldn't dare to do. Things that required courage, sacrifice, and loyalty." He paused, studying her face for any sign of recognition. When none came, he continued. "Years ago, during a time of great unrest, your husband became part of a network dedicated to protecting treasures looted during war. These weren't just objects, they were pieces of history, symbols of cultures and civilizations that might otherwise have been lost forever." Eleanor blinked, trying to process what she was hearing. Treasures? War? None of this sounded like the Thomas she knew. Yet, the more Gabriel spoke, the more fragments of memory began to surface. She remembered late-night conversations where Thomas would hint at adventures from his youth, stories he always brushed off as exaggerations when she pressed him for details. Could it be possible? Had he really been involved in something so extraordinary? Gabriel pulled a worn leather satchel from his side and opened it, revealing a stack of yellowed papers and maps. He spread them out on the table between them, pointing to markings and notes scrawled in handwriting Eleanor recognized immediately. It was Thomas's. Her breath hitched as she traced her fingers over the ink, feeling a strange mix of awe and disbelief. "These documents," Gabriel explained, "are proof of his contributions. He helped safeguard a significant portion of the treasure of fortune in gold and artifacts hidden away for safekeeping. In return, he was promised a share of its value once peace returned. Unfortunately," his voice trailed off, and for the first time his composure faltered. "Unfortunately, he passed before we could fulfill our promise." Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes wide with emotion. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why come here after all these years?" Gabriel hesitated, then sighed. "Because we've located the treasure," he admitted, "and because we owe it to Thomas and to you to make things right. This is his legacy, Mrs. Grayson. Yours now, too." The room fell silent once more, the weight of his words sinking in. Eleanor felt overwhelmed, her thoughts spinning like leaves caught in a whirlwind. Gold, treasure, legacy. These were concepts far removed from her quiet existence. Could she truly accept such a gift? Did she even deserve it? Before she could respond, Gabriel stood and motioned for his companions to follow him outside. "Take your time," he said gently. "We'll wait for you to decide what you want to do next. But know this, whatever choice you make, we'll respect it." As they filed out of the house, Eleanor sank back into her chair, her mind reeling. The world she thought she knew, the quiet, predictable life she'd built for herself, suddenly felt like a fragile illusion, ready to shatter at any moment. Outside, the sound of hooves echoed faintly as the riders moved to secure their horses. Through the window, she watched them unpack wooden crates and bundles wrapped in cloth. Their movements deliberate and efficient. Her heart pounded in her chest. Was this real? Or was it some elaborate trick designed to exploit her vulnerability? She glanced down at the maps and papers still spread across the table. They bore Thomas's unmistakable handwriting, his initials scrawled in the corners. There was no denying their authenticity. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt alive, not just existing, but truly awake. The loneliness that had consumed her for so long began to lift, replaced by a flood of emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in ages. Hope, fear, curiosity, gratitude. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: her life would never be the same again. She rose from her chair and walked to the window, watching as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden hues across the fields. The sight filled her with a strange sense of calm, as if the universe itself was reminding her that change, no matter how daunting, often brings unexpected blessings. Taking a deep breath, she resolved to face whatever lay ahead, not just for herself, but for the man who had given her a second chance without even knowing it. Eleanor stood by the window for what felt like hours, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the room was now bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Outside, the riders worked silently, their movements deliberate and efficient. She could hear the faint clinking of metal against wood as they unpacked the crates. Gabriel had mentioned earlier, gold, treasure, legacy. These words echoed in her mind, like a song she couldn't quite place but couldn't ignore either. Turned away from the window and looked at the map still spread across the table. Thomas's handwriting stared back at her, each stroke of the pen a reminder of the man he used to be, the man she had loved so deeply. Her fingers traced over the ink again, this time with more purpose. It wasn't just his handwriting. It was his voice, his presence, reaching out to her from beyond the grave. She could almost hear him now, whispering those cryptic words. A promise? Gold beyond measure? But what did it mean? What was she supposed to do with all of this? Eleanor had spent years living a quiet, simple life, rising with the sun, tending to her garden, feeding her chickens, and knitting scarves she never finished. That was her routine, her comfort zone. Now suddenly, she was being asked to step into a world she didn't understand, one filled with secrets and riches that seemed too big to comprehend. Her first instinct was to say no, to tell Gabriel and his companions to take their treasure elsewhere. After all, she had survived without it for decades. She didn't need gold or artifacts to live. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way Gabriel spoke about Thomas, with respect, admiration, even gratitude. Or maybe it was the realization that this wasn't just about her. This was about honoring Thomas's memory, about acknowledging the sacrifices he had made. Eleanor sighed and sank back into her chair. Her hands trembled as she rested them on the table. For the first time in years, she felt unsure of herself. She had always prided herself on her independence, on her ability to handle whatever life threw at her. But this was different. This was bigger than her. And yet, she knew she couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when answers were finally within reach. Taking a deep breath, she decided to confront Gabriel. She lit an oil lamp and stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against her face. The riders were gathered around a small fire they had built near the barn. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows across their faces, making them look almost otherworldly. Gabriel sat slightly apart from the group, staring into the fire with a thoughtful expression. "Gabriel," she called softly, her voice steady. Despite the storm raging inside her, he looked up immediately, his sharp blue eyes meeting hers. "Mrs. Grayson," he said, rising to his feet. "Is everything all right?" "I need to know more," she said, stepping closer. "About my husband, about all of this." She gestured toward the crates and bundles stacked neatly nearby. "You said he helped protect treasures during the war. How? Why would someone like him get involved in something so dangerous?" Gabriel nodded, as if he had expected her questions. He motioned for her to sit beside him, and she hesitated only briefly before doing so. The warmth of the fire felt comforting, grounding her in the moment. "Your husband was braver than most people realize," Gabriel began, his tone gentle but firm. "Before you met him, he traveled extensively. He saw things most people only read about in books, places torn apart by conflict, cultures on the brink of extinction. When the war broke out, he joined a network of individuals dedicated to preserving history. Their mission was simple: save what could be saved, hide it where it couldn't be found, and ensure it survived for future generations." Eleanor listened intently, her heart swelling with pride and sorrow. She had known Thomas was adventurous in his youth, but she never imagined he had been part of something so noble or so perilous. He risked his life for this cause. Gabriel continued, not for glory or wealth, but because he believed in its importance. He smuggled artifacts out of occupied territories, hid them in remote locations, and kept detailed records of where everything was stored. His work saved countless pieces of history from destruction. "And the gold?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What does that have to do with any of this?" Gabriel hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Some of the treasures weren't just cultural, they were monetary. Coins, jewelry, relics made of precious metals. They were meant to fund the network's operations, to keep it running when resources were scarce. Your husband played a key role in safeguarding a significant portion of that wealth. In return, he was promised a share of its value once peace returned. Eleanor shook her head, trying to process everything. "But why didn't he tell me? Why keep this a secret?" Gabriel's gaze softened. "I can't speak for him, Mrs. Grayson, but I imagine he wanted to protect you. Knowing about the treasure would have put you in danger. Even now, there are people who would stop at nothing to get their hands on it. Fear prickled at the edges of Eleanor's mind, but she pushed it aside. "So what happens now?" she asked. "What am I supposed to do with all of this?" "That's entirely up to you," Gabriel replied. "We're here to deliver what's rightfully yours. Whether you choose to keep it, share it, or walk away is your decision. But I will say this. Your husband's actions changed the course of history. Whatever you decide, make sure it honors his legacy." Eleanor sat quietly for a moment, the weight of his words settling over her like a heavy blanket. Honoring Thomas's legacy. It sounded so simple, yet it carried such profound meaning. She thought about the years she had spent in silence, shutting people out, hiding from the world. Wasn't it time to change that? To embrace life again, not just for herself, but for the man who had given so much? As she gazed into the fire, she realized something important. This wasn't just about gold or artifacts. It was about connection, about remembering the past while building a better future. Slowly, a sense of clarity washed over her. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't let fear or doubt hold her back anymore. Standing up, she looked at Gabriel and nodded. "Thank you," she said simply, "for bringing this to me. For telling me about Thomas. I'll figure out what to do next." Gabriel smiled, a hint of relief in his eyes. "Take your time," he said. "And remember, we're here if you need us." With that, Eleanor returned to the house, her mind buzzing with possibilities. The crates outside held more than treasure, they held potential. Potential to heal, to rebuild, to transform. As she closed the door behind her, she felt a spark of hope ignite within her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in far too long. Whatever came next, she was ready to face it head on. The next morning, Eleanor woke up earlier than usual. The first rays of sunlight peeked through her bedroom window, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. She lay in bed for a while, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything that had happened the night before. It felt surreal, like a dream she wasn't sure she wanted to wake up from. But when she finally got out of bed and walked to the kitchen, the sight of the crates stacked neatly outside reminded her it was all real. Her heart raced as she stepped onto the porch. 10 large wooden chests sat there, their rough surfaces weathered from travel. Each one bore intricate carvings along the edges, symbols she didn't recognize but instinctively knew were ancient. Beside them, smaller bundles wrapped in faded cloth waited patiently, as if they carried secrets too precious to reveal just yet. The air smelled faintly of earth and metal, a strange mix that made her feel both grounded and unsettled. Gabriel and his companions were already awake, moving quietly around the yard. They seemed to sense her presence because Gabriel turned and gave her a respectful nod. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice calm but warm. "How are you feeling?" Eleanor hesitated, unsure how to answer. How was she feeling? Overwhelmed. Definitely. Excited, maybe. Scared, absolutely. But beneath all those emotions was something else, a quiet determination she hadn't felt in years. She took a deep breath and met his gaze. "I'm ready," she said simply. Gabriel nodded again, as if he understood exactly what she meant. He gestured toward the crates. "Would you like to see what's inside?" She swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. Part of her wanted to say no, to leave the mystery untouched and avoid the complications that came with such wealth. But another part of her knew she couldn't turn away. Not now. This was Thomas's legacy, and she owed it to him and to herself to face it head on. "Okay," she whispered, stepping closer. Gabriel opened the first chest carefully, almost reverently. Inside, gleaming coins spilled over each other, catching the light and sending golden reflections dancing across the ground. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She had never seen so much gold in her life. Each coin was etched with Designs she didn't recognize, symbols of kingdoms long forgotten, perhaps. The sheer beauty of it took her breath away. "This is just the beginning," Gabriel said, closing the lid gently before opening another chest. Inside this one were jewels, necklaces, rings, bracelets, all glittering like stars fallen from the sky. Some pieces were delicate, crafted with precision that spoke of hours of painstaking work. Others were bold and ornate, clearly meant to convey power and status. Every item told a story, a fragment of history preserved against the odds. Eleanor reached out tentatively, picking up a small pendant shaped like a bird mid-flight. It was lighter than she expected, its surface cool against her skin. As she held it, she felt a strange connection to whoever had worn it centuries ago. Who were they? What had their lives been like? Had they cherished this piece as much as she did in that moment? "These artifacts are priceless," Gabriel explained. Not just because of their material value, but because of what they represent. They're pieces of humanity's past, symbols of cultures and traditions that might otherwise have been lost forever. Eleanor nodded slowly, her mind racing. She had always thought of treasure as something shiny and extravagant, a pile of riches meant to be hoarded or flaunted. But now, standing amidst these relics, she realized it was so much more. This wasn't just wealth, it was history, legacy, a bridge between the past and the future. As the day wore on, Gabriel showed her more of the contents of the crates. There were scrolls written in languages she couldn't read, maps marked with routes she didn't recognize, and tools that looked like they belonged in a museum rather than someone's backyard. Each discovery filled her with awe and a growing sense of responsibility. By evening, the weight of it all began to settle in. This wasn't just about her anymore. These treasures weren't meant to sit in a dusty corner of her farm. They deserved to be shared, to be appreciated by people who could truly understand their significance. Yet, sharing them came with risks. Gabriel had warned her about individuals who would stop at nothing to claim the treasure for themselves. Greed and danger lurked in every shadow, waiting to pounce. That night, Eleanor sat by the fire, staring into the flames as she mulled over her options. Her mind kept drifting back to the town, the same place she had avoided for years. She thought about the people who lived there, many of whom struggled daily just to get by. Farmers whose crops failed due to droughts. Families who couldn't afford medicine for their sick children. Teachers working tirelessly despite crumbling school buildings. Could this treasure help them? Should it? But then doubt crept in. What right did she have to decide? She wasn't a leader or a philanthropist. She was just a widow living on the edge of nowhere, trying to make sense of a life she hadn't chosen. Would anyone even trust her intentions? Or would they see her newfound wealth as a threat, a disruption to the fragile balance of their lives? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Gabriel approaching, his expression thoughtful. "Still thinking?" he asked, sitting down beside her. She nodded. "It's a lot to take in," she admitted. "I don't know where to start." He smiled faintly. "Start with what matters most to you. What would your husband want you to do?" The question caught her off guard. She hadn't allowed herself to think about Thomas in that way, not since his death. But now, as she pictured his face in her mind, she realized the answer was clear. Thomas had dedicated his life to protecting history, to preserving the stories of those who came before. He had sacrificed comfort and safety for the greater good. If he were here, wouldn't he want her to do the same? "I think I know what to do," she said finally, her voice steady. "But I'll need your help." Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "Anything you need." Over the next few days, Eleanor and Gabriel worked together to create a plan. They decided to use the treasure not for personal gain, but to improve the lives of the people in her community. Some of the gold would fund repairs for schools and hospitals. Other pieces would be donated to museums, ensuring the artifacts were preserved properly. And a portion would remain hidden, safeguarded for emergencies or future generations. Word of the treasure spread quickly, despite their efforts to keep it discreet. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to Eleanor in years suddenly appeared at her doorstep, offering congratulations and thinly veiled requests for assistance. Merchants arrived, with carts full of goods, hoping to win her favor. Even distant relatives sent letters expressing concern or curiosity about her sudden change in fortune. At first, Eleanor found it overwhelming. The attention, the expectations, the constant scrutiny. But as time went on, she learned to navigate it. She set boundaries, refusing to let greed dictate her actions. Instead, she focused on the projects closest to her heart, rebuilding the town library, funding scholarships for local students, and creating jobs for struggling families. Slowly but surely, the once-forgotten widow became a symbol of hope. In all, she never forgot why she had chosen this path. It wasn't about the gold or the artifacts. It was about honoring Thomas's memory, about using his legacy to build something meaningful. And as she stood on her porch one evening, watching the sun set over the fields, she felt a peace she hadn't known in decades. For the first time in years, Eleanor Grayson wasn't just surviving. She was living. Years passed, and Eleanor Grayson's life was no longer the quiet, solitary existence she had once known. The treasure that had arrived on 10 horses didn't just change her, it transformed the entire town. But for Eleanor, the real transformation wasn't in the gold or artifacts themselves. It was in the connection she rebuilt, the lives she touched, and the sense of purpose she rediscovered after decades of silence. The first few years after the treasure arrived were busy ones. Eleanor threw herself into projects aimed at improving the community. She worked closely with local leaders to prioritize what mattered most: education, healthcare, and infrastructure. The old schoolhouse, which had been falling apart for years, was torn down and replaced with a sturdy brick building. Inside, bright classrooms buzzed with energy as children learned math, science, and history. Many of them now dreamed of becoming doctors, teachers, or engineers, dreams they hadn't dared to imagine before. The hospital, too, saw significant improvements. A new wing was added, complete with modern equipment donated by Eleanor. Nurses and doctors who had once struggled with limited resources could now provide better care to patients. Mothers gave birth in clean, safe environments. Elderly residents received treatment for ailments that had gone untreated for years. For the first time, people felt hopeful about their health and future, but it wasn't just big projects that made a difference. It was the small gestures, too. Eleanor often visited families struggling to make ends meet, bringing food baskets or offering financial support without expecting anything in return. She hosted holiday feasts at her home, inviting everyone from farmers to shopkeepers to share meals together. These gatherings became a tradition, fostering bonds among neighbors who had once kept to themselves. As the town flourished, so did Eleanor's relationships. People who had once whispered about her behind closed doors now greeted her warmly. On the street, children ran up to hug her, calling her Auntie out of affection rather than obligation. Even those who had doubted her intentions early on came around, realizing that her generosity stemmed not from guilt or obligation but from genuine care. One person who stood by her throughout this journey was Frank, the elderly man who had reminded her of Thomas during one of her porch gatherings. Over time, he became a close friend, someone she trusted deeply. They spent hours talking about everything under the sun: gardening tips, childhood memories, even politics. On days when Eleanor felt overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility, Frank would sit beside her and remind her to take things one step at a time. "You've already done more than anyone could ask," he'd say. Don't forget to breathe. Beneath the surface, however, challenges lingered. The treasure brought attention Eleanor hadn't anticipated. Strangers showed up unannounced, claiming to be historians or collectors interested in purchasing the artifacts. Some offered ridiculous sums of money. Others hinted at darker motives, suggesting they represented organizations willing to go to great lengths to acquire the treasure. Eleanor listened politely but firmly refused every offer. Most of the treasure remained hidden, safeguarded in secret locations known only to her and a handful of trusted allies. Gabriel and his companions stayed in touch, checking in periodically to ensure Eleanor's safety. Though they eventually moved on to other missions, they left behind a network of contacts who could assist if trouble arose. Eleanor appreciated their vigilance but tried not to dwell on potential threats. Instead, she focused on the present, the laughter of children playing in the fields, the hum of conversation at the market, the warmth of friendships rekindled. Despite her efforts to stay grounded, there were moments when doubt crept in. Was she doing enough? Could she have used the treasure differently? Late at night, lying awake in bed, these questions sometimes haunted her. But then she'd think back to Thomas, the man who had risked his life to protect history, and remind herself why she had chosen this path. It wasn't about perfection. It was about making the best decision she could with the tools she had. One summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Eleanor found herself sitting beneath the old oak tree. Rusty's grave was nearby, marked by a simple wooden cross she had carved herself. Beside it stood the young sapling she had planted in memory of Thomas, its branches stretching toward the sky. She leaned back against the trunk of the oak, letting the cool breeze wash over her face. Her mind drifted to the countless evenings she had spent here over the years. Lost in thought or sharing quiet moments with Thomas Dot, she thought about how much had changed since his passing. Back then, she had felt adrift, unsure how to navigate life without him. Now, she realized she had found her footing, not by forgetting him, but by honoring his legacy in ways she never imagined possible. Through the treasure, she had discovered strength she didn't know she possessed, and through helping others, she had healed wounds she had long ignored. That night, Eleanor wrote a letter. She didn't intend for anyone to read it immediately. It was more of a reflection, a way to organize her thoughts. Sitting at her kitchen table, pen in hand, she poured her heart onto the page. Asterisk, to whoever reads this, asterisk, asterisk, I want you to know that life is full of surprises, some beautiful, some painful, and some that don't make sense until much later. When my husband passed away, I thought my story was over. I shut myself off from the world, believing I had nothing left to give. But then something extraordinary happened. 10 horses arrived at my door, carrying not just gold but an opportunity to rebuild, to create something meaningful. Asterisk, asterisk, at first, I was scared. This kind of wealth comes with risks, and I worried I wouldn't be strong enough to handle them. But I remembered my husband's courage, his belief in doing what was right even when it was hard. So I took a leap of faith. I used the treasure to help our town, to lift up those who needed it most. In doing so, I found a second chance at living fully. Asterisk, asterisk, if there's one thing I hope you take away from my story, it's this: true wealth isn't measured in gold or jewels. It's measured in love, kindness, and the impact we have on others. Don't wait for opportunities to find you, create them. Reach out, lend a hand, and trust that even the smallest actions can ripple outward, changing lives in ways you might never see. Asterisk, asterisk, thank you for being part of this journey. Together, we've built something beautiful. Keep it alive. Asterisk, asterisk, with gratitude, Eleanor. Asterisk. Years later, when Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep, the town mourned deeply. Hundreds gathered beneath the old oak tree for her funeral, sharing stories of how she had touched their lives. Someone read her letter aloud, and tears flowed freely as they realized the depth of her wisdom and compassion. In the years that followed, the town continued to thrive, guided by the principles Eleanor had instilled. The library she helped build became a hub of learning. The hospital saved countless lives, and the marketplace remained a vibrant center of activity. Beneath the oak tree, a plaque was placed in her honor, inscribed with the words, **, a life dedicated to others leaves a legacy that endures forever. And so, Eleanor's story lived on, a testament to the power of resilience, generosity, and the belief that even in the darkest times, light can break through. The lonely widow who had waited in silence for years had become a beacon of hope, proving that sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones we least expect.